Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The day I found out my great-aunt Millicent left me her house in Salem, Oregon, I thought I'd hit the lottery. A free house? In this economy? I was 26. Drowning in student loans and living in a studio apartment in Portland where the neighbors upstairs sounded like they were training elephants for the circus. But here's the thing that made me pause. Made me really pause. The lawyer who called me, this gravelly-voiced man named Henderson, he cleared his throat 3 times before telling me about the inheritance. 3 times. Like he was trying to swallow something bitter. "There's just one thing, Miss Parker," he'd said, and I could hear papers rustling. "Your aunt left specific instructions. You're to spend at least 1 full night in the house before deciding whether to keep it or sell it." Weird, right? But free house trumps weird every time. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that some inheritances come with responsibilities that extend far beyond property taxes and maintenance. Some houses don't just shelter the living. They cradle the dying. They remember every last breath, every final word, every moment when someone crosses from this world to whatever comes next. The story I'm about to tell you, it changed everything I thought I knew about death, memory, and why some houses should never be inherited. You'll want to stick around for this one, because what I discovered in that house, well, let's just say I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. And by the end, you might realize this story is more connected to your own life than you think. The story begins now. The house stood at 1247 Maple Street, a Victorian painted the color of old bones. 3 stories, wraparound porch, and windows that seemed to watch me as I pulled into the gravel driveway. October in Oregon meant the maple trees were bleeding red and gold, their leaves scattered across the lawn like something I wouldn't fully understand until later. I sat in my Honda Civic for a full 5 minutes, engine ticking as it cooled. Something felt off. Not horror movie off. More like when you walk into a room and can't shake the feeling someone was just talking about you. The kind of feeling that makes your skin prickle, even though there's no logical reason for it. The key Henderson had given me was old brass, warm to the touch despite the October chill. It slid into the front door lock like it belonged there, like it had been waiting for decades. The smell hit me first. Not bad. Just layered. Like old wood and vanilla candles and something else I couldn't place. Something metallic and faint. The kind of smell you might catch in a hospital corridor late at night. "Hello?" I called out, feeling ridiculous. Who was I expecting to answer? The foyer opened into a living room that looked like it had been frozen in 1987. Floral wallpaper with tiny roses that seemed to follow you with their eyes. A burgundy sectional that had probably cost a fortune back in the day. And one of those massive wooden entertainment centers housing a television that probably weighed more than my car. But everything was clean, dust-free, like someone had been taking care of it every single day. I dropped my overnight bag by the stairs and explored. Kitchen with avocado green appliances that belonged in a museum. Dining room with a table set for 6, though the chairs looked like they hadn't been sat in for years. Each room felt expectant, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to discover something important. That's when I found the study. It was tucked behind the kitchen, and the door had been slightly ajar. Inside, the walls were lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been read. But it wasn't the books that made me stop cold. It was the desk, a massive oak thing that dominated the center of the room, and spread across its surface were photographs. Dozens of them. All black and white, all of people I didn't recognize. Men in suits from different eras, women in dresses spanning decades, and they were all lying down, eyes closed, hands folded over their chests. Death photographs. I'd seen them in history classes. Before cameras were common, families would take pictures of deceased loved ones as keepsakes. The only way to capture an image of someone they'd never see again. But why did Aunt Millicent have so many? And why were they arranged so carefully, like some kind of shrine? I picked up one of the photos with trembling fingers. A young woman, maybe 25, wearing what looked like a 1940s dress with pearl buttons. She was beautiful, even in death. Peaceful. Her dark hair was arranged perfectly around her face, and someone had placed a single white rose in her hands. But as I held the photograph, something strange happened. I could hear humming, soft, barely there, like someone in another room was humming a lullaby. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, something from the 1940s that I almost recognized. I set the photo down quickly, and the humming stopped. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. That's just the wind." But the windows were closed, and there was no wind. I picked up another photograph. An elderly man in a three-piece suit, and immediately I could smell pipe tobacco, sweet and woody, like my grandfather used to smoke. I set it down, grabbed another. A middle-aged woman, and suddenly the room felt warmer, like someone had just finished baking bread. Each photograph brought with it a sensation, a memory that wasn't mine. It was as if the house was trying to tell me something through these images of the dead. By evening, I'd convinced myself I was just tired, stressed, the humming thing, the smells. They were probably just my imagination working overtime in an unfamiliar place. Old houses had their own personalities, their own quirks. That's what I told myself as I rummaged through the surprisingly well-stocked pantry. I made myself dinner. Canned soup that tasted like childhood comfort, and crackers that were somehow still fresh despite the expiration date being months old. The kitchen felt comfortable, normal. I even found myself relaxing, thinking maybe I'd been overthinking everything. That's when I noticed the recipe box. It sat on the counter, wooden and worn, with Millicent's favorites written in faded gold script across the top. Inside were dozens of handwritten recipe cards, but they weren't just recipes. Each card had a name at the top, a date, and then it got weird. Eleanor Vasquez, March 15th, 1987. Loved my apple pie. Always asked for extra cinnamon. Made this the day after she passed. Took it to her daughter Maria. Harold Kim, September 3rd, 1994. Said my pot roast reminded him of his mother's cooking back in Seoul. Gone too soon from that heart attack. His wife couldn't eat for weeks after. Sarah Chen, December 22nd, 2003. Christmas cookies were her favorite. Snickerdoodles with extra sugar. Made a batch for her memorial service. Her grandchildren said they were perfect. Every recipe card was a memorial, a way of remembering someone who had died, keeping their memory alive through the foods they loved. I sat at the kitchen table, going through card after card, and a picture started forming. Aunt Millicent hadn't just lived in this house. She'd turned it into some kind of memorial center. But how did she know all these people? Salem wasn't that small a town, and some of these dates went back decades. The recipe for Harold Kim mentioned his wife couldn't eat for weeks. How would Aunt Millicent know that detail unless she'd been there, helping somehow? I was so absorbed in the recipe cards that I almost didn't notice when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly, like someone had opened a freezer door in the middle of the kitchen. My breath came out in little puffs, and I could see frost starting to form on the windows. And then I heard the footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps in the room above me. The master bedroom, according to the layout I'd figured out earlier, but these weren't random footsteps. They had a deliberate pattern. 3 steps toward what I assumed was the window. Pause. 3 steps toward the door. Pause. 3 steps back to the window. Over and over, like someone pacing. Like someone waiting for something that would never come. I froze. Recipe card halfway to the box. The footsteps weren't threatening. They were sad, lonely, like whoever was making them was trapped in some kind of endless loop of grief. I grabbed my phone, ready to call. Who? 911? Help? I'm hearing footsteps in the house I inherited? They'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. Instead, I crept to the bottom of the stairs and listened. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear something else. Crying. Soft, heartbroken sobbing coming from the master bedroom. The kind of crying that comes from deep loss, from the kind of pain that never really goes away. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave. Get in the car, drive back to Portland, deal with whatever this was in the morning when everything seemed less impossible. But something else, something deeper, made me climb those stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, announcing my presence to whatever was waiting above. But the crying continued, and somehow that made it less frightening. Ghosts that cried seemed human, approachable. When I reached the second-floor landing, I could see the master bedroom door was open just a crack. Warm yellow light spilled out, but I hadn't turned on any lights upstairs. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, but the bedside lamp was on, casting everything in a golden glow that reminded me of sunset. The bed was made with military precision, and on the nightstand sat a framed photograph of a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple bun. Aunt Millicent, I assumed. She looked like the kind of person who'd remember your birthday and always have fresh cookies in the jar. But it was what I saw next that made my blood turn to ice water. Wet footprints on the hardwood floor, leading from the window to the door to the window, just like the pattern I'd heard. But they weren't just wet. They were muddy, like someone had been walking through a cemetery in the rain, tracking grave dirt through the house. And they were fresh, still glistening in the lamplight. I should have left then. Should have grabbed my bag and run back to my normal life where footsteps belonged to actual people and muddy prints had logical explanations. But something about those footprints, they looked so sad, so lost, like whoever had made them needed help finding their way. I followed them. They led down the hallway to a door I hadn't opened yet, the third-floor stairs. My hands were shaking as I turned the knob, half expecting it to be locked, but it opened easily, as if it had been waiting for me. The stairs were narrow and creaky, and they led to what must have been Aunt Millicent's private sanctuary. Unlike the formal study downstairs, this room felt lived in, used daily. There was a desk covered in papers, filing cabinets along the walls, and a comfortable reading chair by the window with a blanket draped over one arm, and books. Hundreds of them. But these weren't the leather-bound classics from downstairs. These were journals, ledgers, record books, all handwritten in the same careful script I'd seen on the recipe cards. I opened the nearest journal at random, and my heart nearly stopped. Thomas Hartwell, age 34, died October 15, 1985, car accident on Highway 22 during the evening commute, survived by wife Janet and 2 children, Michael and Sarah. Janet says he was humming Blue Moon when he left for work that morning. He always hummed when he was happy about something. She thinks he was planning to surprise her for their anniversary. I flipped to another page, my hands trembling. Margaret Foster, age 67, died February 8, 1991. Complications from pneumonia at Salem General Hospital. Told her daughter she could smell roses just before she passed, even though it was winter and there were no flowers in the room. She kept reaching for something no one else could see, smiling like she recognized an old friend. Page after page, year after year. Aunt Millicent had been documenting deaths in Salem for decades. Not just the basic facts that you'd find in obituaries. The human details. The last words. The strange occurrences. The small moments that made each death unique and heartbreaking and somehow beautiful. But how could she possibly know all these intimate details? Some of these people had died in hospitals, some at home, some in accidents. How could one woman have access to so many final moments? I found my answer in a letter tucked between the pages of the most recent journal. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, and the handwriting was definitely Aunt Millicent's. My dear niece, if you're reading this, then the house has chosen to accept you. I know this will be hard to understand, but 1247 Maple Street isn't just a house. It's a repository, a sacred place where the last moments of the dying come to rest. I don't know why it chose me 43 years ago when I first moved in as a young nurse. I only know that every night, without fail, the house shows me someone's final hours. Through the walls, through the windows, through dreams and whispers and footsteps in empty rooms. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. The stress of my job, maybe, manifesting in hallucinations. But then I started researching, and I discovered that every vision corresponded to a real death. Real people who had passed away in Salem, sometimes at the exact moment I was witnessing their final breath. I realized these people needed someone to remember them, really remember them. Not just their names carved on a headstone, but who they were in their last moments. Their fears, their hopes, their final thoughts. The house was collecting these moments, preserving them, but it needed a human witness to give them meaning. So I started writing it all down, visiting their families when I could find them, learning their stories, cooking their favorite meals on the anniversaries of their deaths, keeping their memories alive in small, sacred ways. The house rewards this kindness. It will show you beautiful things, too. Last words of love, peaceful passing surrounded by family. The exact moment when pain finally ends and peace begins. But it will also show you the difficult deaths, the scared ones, the angry ones, the ones who aren't ready to go, who fight until the very end. You have a choice, dear. You can leave tomorrow morning and never look back. Sell the house, take the money, live your normal life. The house will understand, and it will find someone else eventually. Or you can stay and become its next keeper, its next witness. Whatever you choose, know that you're not alone in this. I'll always be here, in the walls, in the memories I've collected, helping you understand what it means to be a guardian of final moments. Love always, Aunt Millicent. P.S. Eleanor Vasquez, the young woman in the 1940s photograph downstairs. She was the first person the house showed me. She died in the master bedroom of tuberculosis in 1943, long before I moved in. She's been walking those same 3 steps for 80 years, waiting for someone to remember that she loved to dance more than anything in the world. Put on some Glenn Miller tomorrow night. You'll see what I mean. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the settling wood, every whisper of wind through the eaves, every shadow that moved across the wall could be someone's final moment playing out in the space around me. But I didn't leave either. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with a pot of coffee, reading through more of Aunt Millicent's journals by lamplight. Story after story of ordinary people facing extraordinary endings. A teenager who saw his deceased grandfather waiting for him at the foot of his hospital bed. A grandmother who spent her last conscious hour teaching her 6-year-old granddaughter to braid hair, her fingers still steady despite the cancer. A construction worker who died laughing at a joke only he could hear, something that made him smile even as his heart gave out. Some stories were heartbreaking. A young father who died in a workplace accident, calling for his kids with his last breath, worried about who would teach his son to throw a baseball. An elderly woman who passed away alone during a winter storm, not found for 3 weeks. But Aunt Millicent had somehow known that she spent her final hours looking through photo albums, reliving every Christmas morning and birthday party. But even the saddest stories had something beautiful woven through them. Aunt Millicent had made sure of that. She'd found the families when they existed. She'd told them the details that hospitals and coroners couldn't provide. She'd given them closure, comfort. the knowledge that their loved ones' final moments had been witnessed and honored. As dawn broke over Salem, painting the kitchen in soft pink light, I made a decision. I put on Glenn Miller's In the Mood and waited. At first, nothing happened, just the familiar sounds of an old house waking up. Pipes gurgling, floorboards expanding in the morning warmth. But then, slowly, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision. Not frightening movement, graceful movement, like someone dancing to music only they could hear. I turned toward the living room, and for just a moment, just one perfect, impossible moment, I saw her. Eleanor Vasquez, young and radiant in her 1940s dress with the pearl buttons. She was dancing alone in the space between the sofa and the window, her eyes closed, lost in the music. Her movements were fluid, practiced, like she'd been a dancer before tuberculosis claimed her. When she noticed me watching, she didn't look frightened or angry. She looked grateful. She smiled. The kind of smile that reaches all the way to your soul. And then she faded like morning mist, leaving only the lingering scent of gardenias and the certain knowledge that she was finally, truly at peace. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I've learned to live with the house's gifts and burdens. I've documented 63 new passings, comforted 18 families, and learned to cook recipes that would make the dead weep with nostalgia if they could taste them. I've witnessed deaths that broke my heart and deaths that filled me with hope. I've seen people pass surrounded by love and others who died alone but were met by something beautiful on the other side. The house doesn't just show me deaths anymore. It shows me the moments that matter. Last birthdays celebrated with cake and laughter. Final Christmas mornings where someone manages to wrap one last present with trembling hands. The exact second when someone realizes they're truly, deeply loved, even as they're dying. I've become Salem's unofficial keeper of final moments, though no one in town knows it. When Mrs. Patterson down the street lost her husband last month, I showed up at her door with his favorite chocolate chip cookies, and somehow knew to tell her about the morning he'd spent watching cardinals at their bird feeder, just 2 days before his heart attack. How he'd counted 7 different birds and told the house how lucky he felt to witness such simple beauty. She cried when I told her, but they were healing tears. The house has taught me that death isn't an ending. It's a transformation. And sometimes, if we're very lucky or very chosen, we get to help write the epilogue to someone's story. Here's what I need you to understand. What I desperately need you to grasp. The house doesn't just collect random deaths from Salem, Oregon. It collects the deaths of people who are connected, somehow, to the people who hear its stories. People who will matter to you. People you haven't met yet, but will. And lately it's been showing me a lot of new faces. People from all over the country. Different states, different cities, but all connected by invisible threads to the people listening to this story right now. Last night, the house showed me someone who lives in your town. Someone who knows someone you'll meet next month. Someone whose final moments will somehow touch your life in ways you can't imagine yet. So, tell me in the comments, have you been having strange dreams lately? Dreams about Victorian houses you've never seen? About people you don't recognize calling your name in languages you don't speak? Dreams where you smell flowers that aren't there or hear music from decades past? Because if you have, if any of this feels familiar, then the house might be reaching out to you too. It's always looking for new witnesses, new keepers of final moments, new people who understand that every death deserves to be remembered with love. And it might just be calling to you next. The question is, when it calls, will you answer? Story number 2. What really happens at the crossroads at midnight? The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m. When I saw her, standing there at the intersection of Route 49 and Old Mill Road, just standing, not hitchhiking, not waiting for anyone, just standing. Her white dress caught my headlights for maybe 3 seconds before I passed, but those 3 seconds felt like 3 hours, because something about the way she stood there, perfectly still in that flowing dress, it wasn't right. I know what you're thinking. Ghost story, right? Some local legend about a woman in white who haunts a crossroads. But that's not what this is about. Not exactly. See, I grew up in Millbrook, Tennessee. Population 2,847 on a good day. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest excitement is the annual corn festival, and where certain roads you just don't drive down after dark. Not if you're smart. But here's the thing that'll keep you up tonight. The thing that made me finally decide to share this story. Last week, I got a message from someone who saw my old Reddit post about that night. They sent me a photo from 1987, and in that photo, standing at the exact same crossroads, was the same woman. Same dress, same pose, same everything. 37 years apart. So, before I tell you what really happened that night, before I explain why I can never drive through another intersection without checking my mirrors, let me ask you something. Do you believe some places are thin? Places where things that shouldn't touch do? Because after what I saw at that crossroads, I do. All right, the story's starting now. Get comfortable. Maybe keep a light on. That October night started like any other. I'd been visiting my girlfriend Sarah in Nashville, about an hour and a half from Millbrook. We'd gone to dinner at this little Italian place on Broadway, caught some live music, had a pretty perfect evening actually. But Sarah had an early shift at the hospital, so instead of staying over, I decided to drive back home. Stupid decision. I know that now. The thing about driving through rural Tennessee at night is, well, it's dark. Not city dark, where you've always got some ambient light. This is the kind of dark that swallows your headlights whole. The kind where your high beams only show you about 50 feet of cracked asphalt and whatever's brave enough to dart across the road. I'd made this drive 100 times. Could probably do it with my eyes closed. Though, obviously, I wouldn't recommend that. Usually, I'd take the interstate, but that night there was construction. Some big pileup earlier had traffic backed up for miles, so I took the back roads. The old roads, the ones my grandpa used to warn me about. "Bobby," he'd say. And yes, I know, Bobby isn't the most intimidating name for a horror story protagonist. But stick with me. "Bobby, there's roads in this county that remember things. Best you stick to the new ones after dark." I always thought he was just being superstitious. Old-timers in small towns, you know? They've got a story for everything. Why you shouldn't whistle in the woods, why you should leave a dime on certain graves, why you should never, ever stop at the crossroads after midnight. But I wasn't planning to stop. I was just driving through. 11:43 p.m. I remember checking the clock because Sarah had texted asking if I made it home yet. I was maybe 20 minutes out, cruising down Route 49 with my windows cracked just enough to let in that cool October air. You know that smell? Dry leaves and distant wood smoke and something else. Something that only exists in small towns after dark. The radio was playing that new Taylor Swift song, though I guess it's not new anymore. Funny how time works. Anyway, the signal started getting fuzzy, which wasn't unusual out there. Hills and hollers don't play nice with radio waves. So I switched it off. And that's when I noticed how quiet it was. Not normal quiet. This was aggressive quiet. Like the world was holding its breath. My headlights swept around a curve, and that's when I saw the crossroads up ahead. Route 49 and Old Mill Road. There's no light there. Hasn't been since the county ran out of money in '08. Just a four-way stop with a sign that's been peppered with buckshot so many times you can barely read it. And there she was. I mentioned her before. The woman in white. But seeing her that first time, I didn't think ghost. I thought Accident, maybe? Someone who needed help? My foot went to the brake automatically, that small-town instinct to help kicking in before my brain could catch up. She was maybe 30 feet from the intersection, standing on the gravel shoulder. The dress she wore looked expensive. Not wedding dress expensive, but like something you'd wear to a fancy garden party. It moved in the breeze, but here's the first thing that felt wrong. She didn't. Not even a little. Her hair, this long, dark cascade that should have been dancing in the same wind that moved her dress, it hung perfectly still, like she was standing in a photograph while her clothes existed in real time. I slowed down more. My speedometer dropped to maybe 15 miles per hour as I approached the intersection, and that's when she turned her head. Just her head. The rest of her body stayed frozen, facing the crossroads, but her head swiveled like an owl's until she was looking directly at me. Into me. Through me. I've never sobered up so fast in my life, and I hadn't even been drinking. You know that feeling when every instinct in your body screams at you to run? When your primitive brain, the part that kept your ancestors alive when things with too many teeth hunted in the dark, suddenly takes the wheel? That's what happened when she looked at me. My foot slammed the gas pedal. The old Camry lurched forward, engine whining as I blew through that stop sign like it wasn't even there. In my rearview mirror, I saw her head track my movement, rotating further than any human neck should allow, until I crested the hill and she vanished from sight. I didn't slow down until I hit the Millbrook city limits. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my key in the front door. Mom had left the porch light on. She always did when I was out late, and that warm yellow glow had never looked so welcoming. I practically fell through the doorway, locked it behind me, and stood there in the dark foyer trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Tired from the drive, trick of the light, maybe someone playing a prank, though who stands at an empty crossroads at midnight for a prank? I was halfway up the stairs when my phone buzzed. Sarah, probably wondering why I hadn't texted that I made it home. But when I pulled out my phone, unknown number. The message was just 3 words. You didn't stop. I stared at that message until my eyes burned. No way, no possible way. I hadn't given anyone my number recently, hadn't even seen another car on those back roads, much less another buzz. That was rude. I blocked the number, turned off my phone completely, went to bed and pulled the covers over my head like I was 5 years old and afraid of the monster in my closet. Except now I was 25 and afraid of something much worse. The next morning felt surreal. Sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, birds singing, the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Mom was making pancakes. She always made pancakes on Sundays. And everything was so normal it almost convinced me I'd dreamed the whole thing. Almost. I came downstairs to find her at the stove, humming some old Dolly Parton song. Dad was at the kitchen table, hidden behind the local paper like always. Everything exactly as it should be. Except, "Morning, honey," Mom said without turning around. "How was your drive? You got in pretty late." "It was fine," I lied, sliding into my usual chair. "Just traffic." "Mm-hmm." She flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "You take the back roads?" Something in her tone made me look up. "How did you—" "Your father saw your car coming down Elm Street. Only one way into town from that direction." She finally turned, and something in her expression made my stomach drop. "Bobby, you didn't stop anywhere, did you?" The newspaper rustled as Dad lowered it. His face was serious in a way I'd rarely seen. "Son," he said slowly, "did you drive past the crossroads last night?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Mom set down her spatula, came over and put her hands on my shoulders. "And was there anyone there? How do you know about—" "Everyone knows," Dad interrupted. "Everyone who's lived here long enough. That's why we take the interstate, even with traffic. That's why nobody drives those roads after 11. But what? I swallowed hard. What was she? My parents exchanged a look, one of those married couple conversations that happens without words. Finally, Mom sighed. We don't know what she is, she admitted. But we know what she does, and we know the rules. They told me the history over breakfast. How the woman at the crossroads had been appearing for at least 60 years, maybe longer. Always the same, always after 11 p.m., always waiting. My daddy saw her in 72, Mom said, pouring more coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Driving home from the factory, said she smiled at him when he stopped, said her teeth. She shuddered. He never would tell me what was wrong with her teeth. But he stopped? I asked. For just a second, long enough to realize something was wrong. Then he drove through fast as he could. She met my eyes. He was lucky. Some folks who stop, they don't drive away. Dad pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then showed me a Facebook page. Millbrook Historical Society, he said. Look at the missing persons. I scrolled through post after post. Different years, different faces, but always the same story. Someone driving alone at night. Last seen on Route 49. Car found at the crossroads, engine still running, door open. Driver gone. There's more, Dad said quietly. Sometimes they come back. He told me about Tommy Morrison, 1994. Local kid, quarterback for the high school team, disappeared one November night. They found his truck at the crossroads 3 days later, keys still in the ignition. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Nothing. Then, 6 months later, Tommy walked into his parents' house like nothing had happened. Sat down at the dinner table, asked what was for supper. Except it wasn't really Tommy anymore. He looked the same, Dad said. Talked the same. Knew everything Tommy should know. But something was off. Like looking at a photograph of someone instead of the real person. And his eyes. What about his eyes? They were older. Like something ancient was looking out through them. Tommy Morrison lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of pretending everything was normal while the whole town walked on eggshells around him. Then one night, he walked out of his house, walked back to that crossroads, and stood there. Just stood there. For hours. When the sun came up, he was gone. For good this time. So, what do I do? I asked. My pancakes had gone cold, but I couldn't eat anyway. She has my phone number somehow. She said I was rude for not stopping. Mom squeezed my hand. You follow the rules. Don't drive those roads after 11. Don't answer unknown numbers, and whatever you do. Her grip tightened. Don't go back. I nodded. Of course I wouldn't go back. Why would anyone go back? But here's the thing about rules. They only work if the other side follows them too. That night, I turned my phone back on. 12 missed calls, all from different unknown numbers. I deleted them without listening to the voicemails. Blocked them all. Went to bed early. At exactly midnight, my doorbell rang. I lay there, heart hammering, telling myself I'd imagined it. Old house, settling foundation, maybe a cat on the porch. The doorbell rang again, 3 times, slow, deliberate. Ding, dong, pause. Ding, dong, pause. Ding, dong. Then nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Sat up with every light in my room on, watching the door, waiting. When the sun finally came up, I crept downstairs. The front door was still locked, the porch was empty, but there, on the welcome mat, was a single white thread, the kind that might come from an expensive dress. That's when I knew the rules had changed. For 3 days, I tried to pretend everything was normal. Went to work at the hardware store, helped Dad fix the garage door, had dinner with Sarah, though I didn't tell her what was happening. How do you explain something like that? Hey babe, I'm being stalked by a crossroads entity that may or may not be collecting souls. But every night at midnight, the doorbell rang, 3 times, and every morning, there was another white thread. By the 4th night, I'd had enough. "You're going back," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. We were sitting in my truck outside her apartment, and somehow she'd gotten me to tell her everything. "You're actually considering going back to that crossroads." "I can't keep living like this," I said. "Not knowing, waiting for her to... whatever she's planning to do." "Bobby, no. Your parents told you the rules." "The rules already changed." I hadn't meant to shout. Took a breath. "She's not staying at the crossroads anymore, Sarah. She's coming to my house. What happens when she decides ringing the doorbell isn't enough?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." "You're not going alone." Her jaw had that stubborn set I knew meant arguing was pointless. "If something happens, someone should know. Someone should witness." I wanted to fight her on it. Every protective instinct screamed against bringing her into this. But the truth? I was terrified of going alone. We left at 11:30. Early enough to get there before midnight, but not by much. Sarah held my hand as I drove, her palms sweaty against mine. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? The back roads were darker than I remembered. My headlights seemed weaker, like the darkness was actively pushing back against them. No other cars, no lights in the farmhouses we passed, just us and the night and whatever waited at the crossroads. 11:53 p.m. We rounded the last curve, and there it was, the intersection of Route 49 and Old Mill Road. Empty. I stopped the truck about 50 feet away, engine idling. Scanned the shoulders, the ditches, the tree line. Nothing. Just an empty crossroads under a moonless sky. "Maybe she's gone," Sarah whispered. No. I could feel it. That same aggressive quiet from before. That sense of the world holding its breath. "She's here." 11:57. "Bobby, I have to get out." "What?" "No, we came to look, not to..." "She wants me to stop. Really stop. Not just slow down." My hand was on the door handle. "Maybe if I follow her rules, she'll follow ours again." "That's insane." Yeah, it was. 11:59. I opened the door. The moment my foot touched the asphalt, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs. Frost spread across my windshield in delicate spirals. And she was there. Not appeared. Not walked up. Just there. Standing in the exact center of the crossroads where the 2 roads met. Same white dress. Same impossible stillness. Same wrong smile. "You came back," she said, and her voice was like old paper crumbling. "Good boys follow the rules. What do you want?" Her head tilted, that owl-like movement that made my skin crawl. "Want?" "Oh, Bobby, I don't want anything. I am." "You are what?" "I am the choice. I am the moment between. I am what waits where roads meet and decisions divide." She took a step forward. No, she didn't step. She was just closer. Every crossroads needs a keeper. Every threshold needs a guardian. I don't understand. Tommy understood. Eventually. That smile widened, and Dad had been right not to describe her teeth. "Would you like to understand, Bobby?" From the truck, Sarah was screaming my name, but her voice sounded so far away, muffled, like hearing someone shout underwater. The woman in white extended her hand. "All you have to do is choose. Stay on your road, or take mine. And if I stay on mine, then you drive away. I go back to waiting. The rules reset." Her fingers beckoned. "But you'll always wonder. Every time you reach a crossroads, any crossroads, you'll think of me. You'll dream of this moment. You'll grow old wondering what would have happened if you'd been brave enough to take my hand." She was right. I knew she was right. The not knowing would eat at me forever. And if I take your road, then you become like Tommy, like all the others who were curious enough, brave enough, foolish enough to step off their path. That impossible smile never wavered. You'll understand everything. You'll see what really happens at the crossroads. You'll know why we wait. We? There are so many crossroads, Bobby, so many places where choices matter, and we need more guardians. 12 a.m. Midnight at the crossroads. I looked at her outstretched hand, looked back at the truck where Sarah was pounding on the window, her face twisted with terror, looked at the woman who wasn't really a woman at all, and I made my choice. I took 3 steps backward, slow, deliberate, never breaking eye contact. "No," I said. "I choose my road." Something flickered across her features. Disappointment? Anger? Or maybe respect? "Very well," she said. "You've made your choice." "But, Bobby?" "Yeah?" "There are other crossroads, other midnights, and one day you'll be curious enough to stop for good." Then she was gone. Not vanished. Just gone. Like she'd never been there at all. I drove Sarah home in silence. We never talked about that night. We tried for a while to pretend everything was normal. But how do you come back from something like that? How do you look at someone the same way when you've seen them make a choice that fundamental? We broke up 2 months later. She said I'd changed. She was right. I left Millbrook that spring, moved to Chicago, where the roads are all straight lines and right angles, where there are no real crossroads, just intersections with traffic lights and pedestrians and normal, explainable things. But she was right about something else, too. I dream about it. Every night. That moment of choice, that outstretched hand. And in my dreams, sometimes I take it. Last week, 37 years after someone took that photo I mentioned at the beginning. 37 years after another person saw her at that same crossroads. I got a job offer. Good money. Great benefits. In Nashville. An hour and a half from Millbrook. Which means driving those back roads again. Which means passing that crossroads. Which means... well, that's why I'm telling you this story. Because I've already decided to take the job. I've already planned my route. And I've already checked what time the sun sets in October. 11:47 p.m. That's when I'll reach the crossroads. And this time I might stop for good. So, now you know what really happens at the crossroads at midnight. Now you know why some roads should stay empty after dark. Now you know why, in small towns across America, people still take the long way home. The question is, what would you choose? Would you take the safe road, the known path, and spend your life wondering? Or would you stop? Would you take that pale hand and finally understand what waits where decisions divide? Think about it. Dream about it. And next time you're driving alone at night, next time you approach an empty crossroads as the clock creeps toward midnight, remember this story. Remember Bobby from Millbrook. Remember the woman in white. And whatever you do, don't stop. Unless, of course, you're ready to stay forever. Sweet dreams, everyone. Drive safe. And, hey, if this story kept you up, if it made you check your mirrors a little more carefully, hit that subscribe button, share it with someone who loves a good scare, and leave a comment telling me, what would you choose at the crossroads? Because I have a feeling this isn't the only crossroads story out there. In fact, I know it isn't. More to come. If you're brave enough to listen, good night. Story number 3. The stranger in my photos who looks exactly like me. The first time I saw him, I thought it was a glitch in my phone's facial recognition software. My name is Ryan Cooper, and I'm about to tell you something that'll make you go through your own photos tonight. Trust me, you'll want to check every single one. It started 3 weeks ago in Denver. I was scrolling through photos from my buddy Jake's wedding in Aspen when I noticed something odd. In the background of a group photo, there was someone who looked exactly like me. Not similar, not kind of like me. Exactly like me. Same sandy brown hair, same slightly crooked nose from when I broke it playing baseball in high school. Even the same tiny scar above my left eyebrow. But here's the thing. I was in that photo, standing with the groomsman on the left side. This other me? He was in the crowd, about 20 feet away, staring directly at the camera. At first, I laughed it off. Doppelgangers, right? Everyone's supposed to have one. I even showed it to my girlfriend, Emma. She squinted at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "That's weird," she said. "Maybe it's your long-lost twin?" I'm an only child. And now, let me tell you what happened next, because this is where things get really strange. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night I went through more photos from the wedding. There he was again. Different angles, different moments, always in the background, always watching. In one photo, while everyone was dancing, he stood by the exit door, just standing there. In another, during the cake cutting, he was at the bar, but his head was turned toward our table, never smiling, never talking to anyone. Just there. I zoomed in on every photo. The resemblance was uncanny. He even wore similar clothes to mine. Not the exact same, but close enough to be unsettling. Dark jeans, gray button-up shirt, black jacket. Like someone trying to blend in by copying my style. "Maybe you should ask Jake if he knows who that is," Emma suggested. But something in her voice had changed. She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the unease creeping in. I messaged Jake that night, sent him the clearest photo I had of the stranger. "Hey man, weird question. Who's this guy? Looks a lot like me, haha." Jake's response came quickly. "No idea, dude. Don't remember seeing him. Maybe someone's +1. But here's what made my skin crawl. Jake sent another message a minute later. "Actually, now that I look closer, holy shit, he does look exactly like you. That's creepy AF." I spent the next hour going through every photo on my phone from the past year. Vacation pics from Miami, my cousin's graduation in Seattle, the 4th of July barbecue at my parents' house in Colorado Springs. He wasn't in any of them. Just the wedding photos. I felt relieved. Until I remembered I'd recently backed up my phone and deleted a bunch of old photos to free up space. The cloud backup changed everything. I logged into my Google Photos at 2 a.m., unable to sleep. Emma had gone home, said she had an early meeting, but I knew the photos had freaked her out too. I started scrolling backward through time. Months of normal photos. Nothing unusual. Then I found him. Chicago. 6 months ago. I'd gone there for a work conference. In a photo I'd taken of the Bean, that giant reflective sculpture in Millennium Park. There he was, standing among the crowd of tourists, but his reflection in the sculpture was looking directly at me, not at the sculpture like everyone else, at me. My hands were shaking as I kept scrolling. New York. 8 months ago. Times Square. I'd taken a selfie with the bright lights behind me, far in the background, barely visible unless you zoomed in, him, standing still while everyone else was in motion. Blurred tourists moving all around him, but he was crystal clear, motionless, staring. San Francisco. A year ago. Golden Gate Bridge. I'd asked a stranger to take my photo. There, walking on the bridge's pedestrian path behind me. The pattern became clear. He only appeared in photos taken in different cities. Never in Denver, where I lived. Always when I traveled. Always in the background. Always watching. I called Emma, my heart pounding. Pick up, pick up, pick up. Ryan? It's 2 a.m. What's wrong? He's in more photos, going back over a year. Every city I visited. Silence. Then, what do you mean, every city? I explained what I'd found. The silence on her end grew heavier. Emma? You still there? Ryan, remember when you visited me in Portland last spring? Before we started dating? My blood ran cold. I'd forgotten about that trip. Just a weekend visit to see if we had chemistry beyond our online conversations. Send me those photos, she said. Now. I found them. Casual shots around Portland, coffee shops, food carts, the Japanese garden. Oh my God, Emma whispered. Ryan, he's in 3 of these, and in the one at the coffee shop, he's sitting at the table right behind us. I zoomed in. There he was, reading a newspaper, but the angle was wrong. His eyes weren't on the paper. They were on us. On me. This is insane, I muttered. Who the hell is this guy? Maybe you should go to the police? Emma suggested. But what would I tell them? Someone who looks like me appears in my travel photos? They'd think I was crazy. I stayed up all night going through every photo. The more I found, the more disturbing the pattern became. He never appeared in photos where I was alone, only in crowded places, tourist spots, public events, places where he could blend in. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In each photo, he was getting closer. Chicago, maybe 50 feet away. New York, 30 feet. San Francisco, 20. Portland, 10 feet, just one table away. The wedding in Aspen. He'd been close enough to touch. I became obsessed. Emma tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating, just searching through photos, looking for patterns, trying to understand. Then I had an idea. A terrible, brilliant idea. What if I took new photos? What if I could catch him in the act? The next Saturday, I drove to Boulder, touristy enough to fit the pattern, close enough to Denver for a day trip. I walked around Pearl Street, taking photos of everything. Street performers, shop windows, random crowds, nothing. He wasn't in any of them. Maybe he's gone, Emma said that night, trying to comfort me. Maybe whatever this was, it's over. But I knew better. He only appeared in photos from trips, real trips, different cities, not day trips. So I booked a flight to Las Vegas, just for the weekend. Told Emma I needed to test my theory. She wanted to come with me, but I said no. I needed to do this alone. In truth, I was scared for her. What if this stranger, this other me, was dangerous? Vegas was perfect. Crowds everywhere. Tourists with cameras. I spent 2 days taking hundreds of photos. The Strip. Fremont Street. Casinos. On the plane home, I went through them all. My heart sank. Nothing. Not a single sighting. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was over. But when I got home and uploaded the photos to my laptop with its bigger screen, I saw what I'd missed on my phone. He was there, in 7 different photos. But something had changed. He wasn't watching me anymore. In every photo, he was looking at something else. Someone else. He was watching Emma. I found her in the background of 5 of the photos. I hadn't even noticed she'd followed me to Vegas. She must have taken a different flight, stayed at a different hotel. But there she was, in the crowd, trying to keep an eye on me. And in every photo where she appeared, he was watching her instead of me. My phone rang. Emma. Hey, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. How was the trip? Find anything? I wanted to ask her why she'd followed me, why she'd lied, but something held me back. No, I lied. Nothing. You were right. I think it's over. Oh, thank God, she sighed. I've been so worried about you. Want me to come over? I could bring dinner?" "Sure," I said, staring at a photo where the stranger stood just 10 feet behind her on Fremont Street. "That sounds nice." After we hung up, I looked at the photos again, really looked, and I noticed something I'd missed before. In every photo where he appeared, I could see Emma somewhere in the frame. Even the old ones, even from before we met. She was always there, somewhere in the background. Sometimes barely visible, sometimes just a shoulder or the back of a head, but always there. How was that possible? We'd met online just 18 months ago, but these photos went back further than that. I heard her key in my lock. She had a copy for emergencies. My hands were trembling as I closed the laptop. "Hey, babe," she called out. "I brought Thai food. Your favorite?" I stood up, forcing a smile as she walked in. She looked beautiful, same as always. Long dark hair, green eyes, that smile that had made me fall for her. "Thanks," I said, taking the bag from her. "Smells great." We ate in relative silence. She kept glancing at me, concern written across her face. "You sure you're okay?" she asked. "You seem different." "Just tired," I said. "This whole thing has been exhausting." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was cold. "I hate seeing you like this," she said. "Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Her thumb traced circles on my hand, a gesture that usually comforted me. Now, it just felt wrong. "I should go," she said finally. "Let you get some rest, but Ryan, promise me you'll stop looking at those photos. Promise me you'll let this go." "I promise," I lied. She kissed me goodbye. Her lips were cold too. Had they always been that cold? After she left, I did something I'd never done before. I searched for her online. Really searched. Not just Facebook or Instagram. Deep searches. Old forums, archived websites. Emma Chen. Common enough name. Harder to trace. But I found things. Little things. A high school yearbook photo from a school in Portland she'd never mentioned. A college ID from somewhere in California. But she'd told me she went to school in Washington. And then I found it. A news article from 3 years ago. Local Denver paper. Small story, easy to miss. Man dies in apartment fire on Capitol Hill. The photo was grainy, black and white. But it was him, the stranger from my photos. Same face, same features, same as me. His name was Ryan Mills. The article said he'd died alone. No family, no friends at the viewing, just a small service paid for by the city. My phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Can't stop thinking about you. I'm worried. I'm coming back." I locked my door, put the chain on. My mind was racing. Ryan Mills, similar name, same face. Died 3 years ago, but appeared in my photos starting a year ago. Another text. "I'm outside. Please let me in. We need to talk." I didn't move, didn't respond. "Ryan, I know you found something. I can explain everything. Please." How did she know? I hadn't told her anything. "I've been trying to protect you," her next text said. "From him. From the truth. Please let me in before it's too late." Protect me? From a dead man who looked exactly like me? My laptop dinged. A new email. No sender address. Just a subject line. "Look at the wedding photos again." Attached were the photos from Jake's wedding. But these weren't the ones from my phone. These were different angles. Different moments. In one, the stranger stood next to Emma at the bar. They were talking. In another, they were dancing, her hand on his shoulder, his face finally showing emotion, smiling at her. In the last photo, they were kissing. The timestamp showed it was taken after I'd already left the reception. My phone rang. Emma. I didn't answer. She started pounding on the door. "Ryan, please, you don't understand. He's not who you think he is." I looked at the final photo again, studied it. The stranger kissing Emma. But something was off about the angle, the perspective. It was taken from where I'd been standing, from my exact viewpoint, as if I had taken the photo, but I hadn't. I'd left by then, hadn't I? "Ryan!" Emma screamed. "He's already inside. He's been inside the whole time." I turned around slowly. The apartment was empty. Just me and my reflection in the dark TV screen. But the reflection was smiling, and I wasn't. "That's not your reflection." Emma's muffled voice came through the door. "That's him. That's Ryan Mills. He's been switching places with you, every trip, every city. He takes your place for just a few hours, and you never remember." I stepped closer to the TV. The reflection stepped closer too. Same face, same clothes, but the eyes were different. "I fell in love with you," Emma sobbed through the door. "The real you. But he found out. He's jealous. He wants his life back. The life you've been living." The reflection raised its hand. I hadn't moved mine. And then I remembered. Fragments. Flashes. Watching myself from across crowded rooms. Following myself through cities. Taking photos of myself? No. Not myself. Him. I was Ryan Mills. I'd been dead for 3 years. But somehow, I kept coming back. Drawn to this other Ryan. This living Ryan. Watching him live the life I'd lost. And Emma. She could see me. Had always been able to see me. She'd tried to keep us apart. Tried to protect him. But I'd found a way in. A way to trade places, just for moments. Just long enough to feel alive again. "Please," Emma whispered. "Let him go. Let Ryan Cooper go. I know you loved me first. I know this isn't fair. But you're dead. You have to accept that." I looked at my hands. Were they my hands? Or his? I couldn't remember anymore. The reflection in the TV smiled wider. "We're the same person," it said. "We've always been the same person. Just separated by death, by time, by choice." "No," I said, but I wasn't sure who was speaking. "We're not the same. Look at the photos again," the reflection said. "Look who's taking them." I grabbed my phone, opened the photos, but now I saw the truth, the metadata, the angle of each shot. They weren't taken by me, they were taken by him, by the stranger. I was the one in the background. I was the one being watched. I was the one who didn't belong. Emma had stopped pounding. The silence was deafening. "She chose you," the reflection said. "But I chose her first, 3 years ago, before the fire, before I died. She was mine. Then why help me?" I asked. "Why trade places?" The reflection's smile faded. "Because being dead is lonely, and watching you live my life, our life, was torture. So I made a deal. A few hours here and there, a taste of life. But you always fought back, always reclaimed your body. Until now. Until now, you've finally seen the truth, accepted it. And that's all I needed. Doubt. Just enough doubt about who you really are." The door burst open. Emma stood there, tears streaming down her face. "Ryan, don't listen to him. You're Ryan Cooper. You're alive. You're—" But I couldn't hear her anymore, because I was looking at my hands again, and they were fading, becoming transparent, like a ghost, or like a man who'd been dead for 3 years finally accepting the truth. "No!" Emma ran toward me, but her hands passed right through. "No, no, no! You're real! You're alive! Remember? Remember our first date! Remember our trip to Portland! Remember!" But I couldn't remember, because maybe those weren't my memories. Maybe they were his. Maybe I was just a ghost who'd borrowed a life for too long. The reflection stepped out of the TV, solid, real, alive. "Thanks for keeping my seat warm," Ryan Cooper said, straightening his shirt. My shirt, his shirt. "But it's time for you to go." And as I faded away, as Emma sobbed and begged me to fight, to remember, to stay, I took one last photo. Not with a phone, not with a camera, but with whatever ghosts use to capture moments. A photo of them, the living, the real, the ones who get to stay. And somewhere, in someone else's photos, in the background of their perfect moments, I'll be watching. Just another stranger who looks exactly like someone they used to know. Someone who might have been them. Someone who might have been real. Someone who might still be there, waiting in the reflection, ready to trade places again. The photos are still on Ryan Cooper's phone. He doesn't look at them anymore. Says they give him nightmares. Says he sometimes feels like he's not really himself, like someone else is living his life. Emma doesn't come around anymore. She says she can't look at him without seeing me, without wondering which one of us she's really talking to. And sometimes, late at night, Ryan Cooper takes a photo of himself, just to check, just to make sure the reflection matches, just to make sure he's still the one in control. But in those photos, if you look carefully, if you zoom in just right, you can see me, standing behind him, waiting, watching, looking exactly like him, because we're the same person, separated by death, by choice, by a camera's click. And one day, when he's not paying attention, when he's tired or drunk or distracted, I'll step back in, just for a moment, just for a photo. And maybe this time, I'll stay. But wait, there's something else, something I haven't told you, something about the photos that even Ryan Cooper doesn't know. You see, I've been watching the comments on his social media, the few photos he's posted since that night, and people have started noticing things, little things. "Hey, Ryan, who's that behind you in the coffee shop pic? Dude, is it just me or does that shadow look like a person? Why do you look different in this one? Like, older, somehow?" He deletes those comments, blocks those people, but they keep coming, because they can see what he can't, or won't. That sometimes, in his photos, there are 2 Ryan Coopers. One in front, one behind, one smiling, one not. One alive, one, well. And here's the really terrifying part. The part that should make you check your photos right now. It's not just happening to him. Last week, a woman in Phoenix posted about finding herself in the background of her own vacation photos. 2 weeks ago, a man in Boston swore he saw his dead brother in every picture from his wedding. 3 days ago, a teenager in Miami noticed her reflection didn't match her movements in a TikTok video. We're spreading. Those of us who died but didn't leave. Those of us who watch from the backgrounds of your lives. Those of us who look exactly like you because we are you, or were you, or will be you. The borders are getting thinner. The camera captures more than just light now. It captures possibilities, alternatives, the you that made different choices, the you that died, the you that's still waiting to live. And Emma, she knows. She's always known. That's why she could see me. That's why she tried to keep us apart. Because she's one of the few who can see both sides, the living and the lingering, the real and the reflection. She called me last night. Don't ask me how the dead answer phones. We just do. "It's getting worse," she said. "More people are noticing. More people are switching. Some don't even realize they're not themselves anymore." "Why tell me?" I asked. "Because you started it. That night, when you finally made him doubt, you opened a door. And now they're all coming through." I could hear the fear in her voice, real terror, not of me, but of what I'd unleashed. "Check the news," she whispered. "Look for the pattern. Missing persons who aren't missing. People who swear they've seen themselves. Twins who don't have twins." "I don't watch the news. The dead don't need to. We already know what's happening. We're part of it. We're causing it. Every photo, every selfie, every security camera, every reflection in every screen, they're all doorways now. Chances for us to peek through, to trade places, to take back what was ours, or what we think was ours. Because honestly, after 3 years of watching, of waiting, of switching, I'm not sure anymore. Was I ever Ryan Mills? Was he ever Ryan Cooper? Or were we always just two possibilities of the same person, separated by choices we can't remember making? The woman in Phoenix. She disappeared yesterday. Her family says she's still there, but different. Colder. Like she's forgotten how to be herself. The man in Boston won't leave his house. Says his brother is trying to take over his life. The teenager in Miami. She's been hospitalized. Keeps screaming about the girl in the mirror who won't stop smiling. So check your photos, right now, while you're listening to this. Go ahead, I'll wait. Look in the backgrounds. Look at the reflections. Look at the shadows. Look for faces that shouldn't be there, faces that look like yours. And if you find one, if you see yourself where you shouldn't be, don't panic. Don't delete the photo. Don't try to convince yourself it's nothing. Just remember, you're still you. For now, as long as you believe it, as long as you don't doubt, as long as you don't look too closely at the differences. Because the moment you start wondering, the moment you ask yourself, am I really me? That's when we can switch. That's when the door opens. That's when you might find yourself on the wrong side of the camera, watching someone else live your life, wondering if it was ever yours to begin with, wondering if you're the stranger in your own story. Ryan Cooper moved away from Denver last month, changed his name, deleted all his social media, threw away his phone. But it doesn't matter. I know where he is. I'll always know. Because we're connected. Because we're the same. And one day, when he's finally stopped running, when he's finally stopped checking every reflection, when he's finally convinced himself it was all in his head, I'll be there, in a window, in a puddle, in someone else's photo of a crowded street, waiting for my turn to be real again, waiting for him to be the ghost, waiting for the click of a camera to make it official. So, sweet dreams, listeners. And remember, that face in your photos that looks like you, that person in the background who seems familiar, that reflection that doesn't quite match. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's just your imagination. Or maybe it's you. The other you. The one who's been waiting. The one who's getting closer with every photo. The one who's listening to this story right now, through your ears, wondering what it would be like to be on that side of the screen. Check your photos. Check them now. Before it's too late. Before you become the stranger in someone else's story. Before you forget which side of the camera you started on. Sweet dreams. Story number 4. I photographed something that shouldn't exist in the lake. The photo is still on my phone. I've tried deleting it 17 times, but it keeps coming back. Every morning at 3:47 a.m., there it is again in my camera roll. That thing beneath the water at Lake Winnebago, watching me through the lens. If you're listening to this right now, lying in bed thinking this is just another creepy story to help you drift off to sleep, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 weeks ago in Wisconsin, and I haven't slept properly since. Not because I'm scared. Well, not just because I'm scared, but because I know it's still out there. And worse, I think it knows I saw it. But let me ask you something first, and be honest. Have you ever taken a photo of something only to realize later that there was something in the frame you didn't see when you pressed the shutter? Something that shouldn't have been there? Something that couldn't have been there? Well, keep that thought in mind as I tell you what happened, and if you make it to the end of this story, check your own photos. You might be surprised what's been watching you all along. The story is starting now. My name is Jake Morrison, and was a nature photographer based out of Madison, Wisconsin. 3 weeks ago, I drove up to Lake Winnebago for what should have been a routine sunrise shoot. I'd done it 100 times before. Wake up at 4 a.m., drive the 90 minutes north, set up my gear on the eastern shore, and capture those golden hour shots that my Instagram followers seem to love. That morning felt different from the moment I pulled into the empty parking lot at Asylum Point Park. The October air had that peculiar Midwest chill that cuts right through your jacket. But it wasn't just the cold that made me shiver. The lake was too quiet. No waves lapping against the shore. No early morning birds. Even the wind had gone silent, like nature itself was holding its breath. I grabbed my camera bag, a beaten-up Loa Pro that had seen better days, and made my way down to my usual spot. The wooden pier stretched out into the darkness, its weathered planks groaning under my weight. I'd photographed from this exact location dozens of times, but something felt wrong. The water was perfectly still, not calm, still, like black glass, like it was waiting for something. I set up my tripod at the end of the pier, mounted my Canon R5, and started framing my shots. The eastern horizon was just beginning to blush with pre-dawn light, that magical blue hour that photographers chase. Through my viewfinder, everything looked normal, beautiful even. The silhouette of the far shore, the first hints of color bleeding into the sky, the perfect mirror of the water's surface. Click, click, click. I worked methodically, adjusting my composition, tweaking my settings. ISO 400, f8, shutter speed at 125th. The conditions were perfect, almost too perfect. That's when I noticed it, or rather, didn't notice it. Through my lens, about 50 yards out, there was a spot where the water wasn't reflecting the sky. Just a patch of absolute darkness, maybe 10 feet across. Like someone had cut a hole in the lake's surface. I lowered my camera and looked with my naked eyes. The water appeared normal, lifted the camera back up. There was the dark spot again, only visible through the lens. My hands started to shake slightly as I adjusted the focus. The spot seemed to shift, not move exactly, but pulse, like it was breathing. I increased my shutter speed to compensate for my trembling hands and took another shot. Click. The moment the shutter closed, the temperature dropped, not gradually, instantly. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost began forming on my camera's LCD screen. The still air suddenly smelled of copper and wet earth, like the inside of an old well. Through the viewfinder, the dark spot was growing, spreading outward like spilled ink, and in its center, something was moving, rising, breaking the surface without creating a single ripple. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to pack up and leave, but I couldn't look away, couldn't lower the camera. My finger moved to the shutter button on its own. Click. The thing in the water. It turned, toward me, toward the camera, and I saw. God, I wish I could unsee it. It had a face, if you could call it that. Imagine someone tried to recreate human features using only their memory of drowning victims. Pale, bloated flesh that seemed to shift and restructure itself every few seconds. Eyes that were too far apart, way too far apart, like they were trying to slide off the sides of its head, and they were looking directly at me. Not at the camera, at me. Through the lens, through the viewfinder, right into my soul. My finger pressed the shutter again. I couldn't stop it. Click, click, click. Rapid fire mode engaged, capturing 5 frames per second, each image showing more of this thing as it rose from the water. No splash, no waves. The lake's surface remained perfectly still even as this massive form emerged. It had arms, too many arms. I counted 6 before I lost track, each one bending in places arms shouldn't bend. The hands. Jesus, the hands. They had fingers that split into more fingers, which split again, creating these fractal patterns of flesh that hurt to look at. The camera kept firing, my memory card filling up with images I knew I'd never be able to forget. The thing was fully out of the water now, standing on the surface like it was solid ground. It had to be 20 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was wrong. Like someone had tried to stretch a human form but didn't understand the underlying structure. Ribs on the outside, spine twisting in a double helix, skin that looked like it was made of lake water, constantly flowing and reforming. And it was walking toward me, each step perfectly silent, the water beneath its feet turning to that same impenetrable darkness I'd first noticed. 50 yards, 40, 30. My camera's autofocus was hunting now, struggling to lock on to something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than it should. The viewfinder kept flickering between the thing and something else. Brief flashes of images that didn't belong. A child's bedroom, a hospital corridor, a woman screaming soundlessly, places I'd never been, memories that weren't mine. 20 yards. I finally managed to tear my eye away from the viewfinder. Without the camera lens between us, the thing wasn't there. The lake was empty, calm, normal. I raised the camera again, and it was right there, 10 yards away, close enough that I could see the water droplets on its skin wasn't the right word, surface. Close enough to see that those droplets were moving, crawling, each one a tiny version of the whole, fractally recursive nightmares in miniature. It stopped at the edge of the pier, those impossible eyes fixed on my camera, on me, and then it smiled. Have you ever seen something smile that shouldn't have a mouth, that shouldn't understand the concept of smiling? There aren't words. It raised one of its many arms, pointed at my camera, and spoke, not with sound. The words just appeared in my head, in a voice that sounded like drowning. You can see me now. My camera clicked one more time, and then the memory card was full. The screen went dark. Error message, card full. And just like that, it was gone. The thing, the darkness on the water, the unnatural cold. Everything returned to normal so suddenly I nearly fell over. The sun was rising now, painting the lake in gorgeous oranges and pinks. Birds started singing. Waves began lapping gently against the pier. Just another beautiful October morning on Lake Winnebago. I sat there for I don't know how long, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I packed up my gear with numb fingers and walked back to my car. Drove home in silence. Told myself it was a hallucination, lack of sleep, too much coffee, a waking dream. Then I got home and checked my photos. The first 50 shots were normal, beautiful even. The kind of sunrise photos I'd built my modest following on. Golden light, perfect reflections, the serene beauty of a Midwest lake at dawn. Then I got to the 51st photo. My hands started shaking again. There it was, the dark spot on the water. Not a processing error, not a smudge on my lens, a perfect circle of nothingness where the water should have reflected the sky. Photo 52 showed it beginning to rise. 53. The first glimpse of that impossible face. By photo 60, it was fully revealed in all its horrific detail. The image was sharp, perfectly exposed. No motion blur despite my trembling hands, like the camera wanted to capture every nightmarish detail. I should have deleted them, formatted the card, thrown the whole camera in the trash. But I couldn't. I spent hours staring at those photos, zooming in, studying details that made my head hurt. The way its flesh seemed to be made of compressed water, the fractured geometry of its form, the smaller versions of itself that crawled across its surface like living tattoos, and the eyes. In every photo, no matter what angle, those eyes were looking directly at the camera, at me, following me even in still images. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, standing at the edge of the pier, pointing. "You can see me now?" On the third day, I posted one of the normal sunrise photos to Instagram, just trying to pretend everything was fine, maintain some semblance of normalcy. Within an hour, I had dozens of comments, but they weren't about the sunrise. "What's that in the water? Dude, is that a person swimming? Anyone else see that face in the background? This is edited, right? Right?" I looked at the photo again, the one I'd chosen specifically because it was taken before I'd seen the thing, before photo 51. But there it was, barely visible, a dark shape beneath the water, watching. It had been there all along, in every photo. I just hadn't been able to see it until I went back through my entire portfolio, every lake photo I'd ever taken. Hundreds of them. Years of work. And in every single one, if I looked closely enough, if I knew what to look for, there it was. Sometimes just a shadow. Sometimes a distortion in the water. Sometimes almost fully visible, standing just outside the frame. Watching. Waiting. How long had it been there? How many times had I photographed it without knowing? How many other people had captured it in their vacation photos, their fishing trips, their family gatherings by the water? That night, I made a decision. I had to go back. Had to understand what I'd seen. What had been watching me? Watching all of us, from just beneath the surface. I loaded my gear into the car and started driving north. Back to Lake Winnebago, back to Asylum Point. But I wasn't prepared for what I'd find. Because the thing in the lake, it wasn't done with me. And those photos I'd taken, they weren't just images anymore. They were an invitation, a doorway. And I'd already stepped through. I arrived at the lake just after midnight. The parking lot was empty, which wasn't unusual, but the silence was different this time. Heavier, like the air itself was holding back sound. I grabbed my camera and a flashlight and made my way to the pier. The wooden planks creaked under my feet, but the sound seemed to die just inches from where it was made. My flashlight beam looked thick, like it was pushing through something denser than air. And the smell. That same copper and earth scent from before, but stronger, mixed with something else, something organic and wrong. I reached the end of the pier and set up my tripod, hands moving on autopilot. I didn't even know what I was planning to do. Take more photos? Try to communicate with it? I just knew I had to be there. Had to see. I turned on my camera and switched to live view mode. The LCD screen glowed in the darkness, showing the black water through my lens. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint reflection of stars. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Then the screen flickered. For just a moment, I saw myself. standing on the pier. But the image was wrong. I was alone, but in the photo, there were other figures standing behind me. Dozens of them, all watching through the camera. All with those same impossible eyes. The image stabilized. Back to the empty water. But now I could feel them. The watchers. Standing right behind me, breathing on my neck with breath that smelled like lake bottom. I couldn't turn around, couldn't move, could only stare at the LCD screen as the water began to change. It started as a ripple, perfect concentric circles spreading out from a point about 50 yards away. Then the surface began to bulge, like something massive was pushing up from below. The water didn't break. It stretched, pulled taut like plastic wrap, and beneath it I could see everything. Everyone. Every person who had ever drowned in this lake, in any lake. They were all down there, pressed against the underside of the surface, trying to break through, trying to breathe, their faces distorted by the membrane of water that held them down. Men, women, children, hundreds of them, thousands, all looking up at me, all mouthing the same words. "You can see us now." My camera fired. I hadn't pressed the shutter. It just took the photo. Then another, and another. Rapid fire, filling the memory card with images of the drowned, and with each click they pressed harder against the surface, the water stretching thinner, their features becoming clearer. I recognized some of them. The Henderson kid who'd gone missing last summer, the college student from the news who'd fallen through the ice, my own reflection among them, even though I was still standing on the pier, still breathing, still. The water broke. Not with a splash, it just opened, like an eye, like a mouth. And from that opening, the thing rose again. But this time, I understood what it was. Not a creature, not a monster. It was made of them, all of them. Every soul the lake had claimed, twisted together into a single form, a collective consciousness of the drowned, given shape by decades of accumulated grief and fear and desperate final moments. It stood on the water, taller than before, more solid, more real. And when it spoke, it used all their voices at once. "You photographed us, captured us. Now we can never leave." I looked at my camera's LCD. The last photo it had taken showed not the thing, but me, standing on the pier. But my eyes, they were too far apart. My fingers, they had too many joints. The water behind me was full of faces, all watching, all waiting. "Every photo is a doorway," the collective voice continued. "Every image, a tether. You've spent years opening doors. Now it's time to walk through." I finally found the strength to move, to run. I grabbed my camera and sprinted down the pier, those rotten planks shrieking under my feet. Behind me, I could hear them following. Not footsteps. The sound of water flowing uphill, of lungs filling with lake water, of last breaths bubbling to the surface. I made it to my car, threw myself inside, locked the doors, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see them, all of them, standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching, waiting. The thing made of drowned souls raised one arm in what might have been a wave. I drove home in a panic, burst through my front door, went straight to my computer. I was going to delete everything, every photo, destroy the memory cards, burn the camera if I had to. But when I opened the folder, they were already there, in every photo I'd ever taken. Not just the lake shots, everything. Birthday parties, weddings, street photography, portraits. In every image, somewhere in the background, they watched. The drowned, the collective, growing clearer with each passing hour. And the worst part? The thing that made me realize there was no escape? I found them in other people's photos too, on social media, in news articles, family albums. They were everywhere. had always been everywhere. We just hadn't been able to see them until someone photographed them properly, until someone with the right eye, the right camera, the right moment opened the door. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't slept since. Can't sleep. Because every time I close my eyes, I see them, getting closer. And the photos, they keep changing, showing me things that haven't happened yet. Places I've never been. My own face among the drowned. This morning, I woke up to find a new photo on my phone, one I didn't take. It shows me, floating face down in dark water. The timestamp says tomorrow, 3:47 a.m., Lake Winnebago, Asylum Point. I've tried deleting it 17 times. It keeps coming back. And each time it returns, I look a little deeper under the water. A little more like them. My eyes a little farther apart. I'm going back to the lake tonight. Not because I want to, because I have to. Because that's what the photo shows. That's what all the photos have been leading to. Every image a doorway. Every click of the shutter another step toward drowning. If you've made it this far, if you're still listening, I need you to do something for me. Check your photos, the ones from your last vacation, your last trip to the beach, the lake, the pool. Look closely at the water. Look for the spots where the reflection isn't quite right, the shadows that don't match anything above the surface, the faces just beneath the waves. They're there. They've always been there, waiting for someone to see them, to photograph them, to open the door. And once you see them, once you really see them, they can see you too. The photo is still on my phone. Tomorrow. 3:47 a.m. Lake Winnebago. I'll be there. I don't have a choice anymore. The doorway is open, and I have to walk through, have to join them, have to become part of the collective, part of the thing that watches from beneath the water. But before I go, before I become just another face pressed against the underside of the surface, I wanted to tell someone, wanted to warn you, stay away from the water. Don't take photos of lakes at dawn. And whatever you do, don't look too closely at the images you've already taken. Because they're watching. They're always watching. And now they know you're listening. Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing. If you found this story unsettling, if you're lying there in the dark wondering if it's real, if you're thinking about checking your own photos, leave a comment below. Tell me what you found. Share this with someone who loves taking pictures by the water. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens next. Because the thing is, I'm recording this at 3:32 a.m. In 15 minutes, I'll be at the lake. And if the photo on my phone is right, if what I've seen is true, then this isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Because every view, every share, every comment opens the door a little wider, lets them see a few more people, reach a little further from the water. And some of you have already taken their picture. You just don't know it yet. Check your phones, check your cameras, check the reflection in your screen right now. Do you see them? They see you. Story number 5.
The last thing I expected to see at 3 in the morning was my face on a missing person poster. But there it was, taped to the bus stop pole, rain-soaked and peeling at the edges. My own eyes stared back at me from the faded paper. The text below read, Marcus Chen, last seen October 15th, 2019. Bus driver for Metro Transit Line 47. I touched the poster with trembling fingers. October 15th, 2019. That was 5 years ago. But I'd been driving the night shift on Line 47 just yesterday, hadn't I? My name is Marcus Chen, and I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I swear on everything I hold dear, every word is true. If you're listening to this late at night, maybe alone in your bed, good. The darkness might help you understand. Sometimes the truth is easier to accept when the lights are off. Before I tell you what happened, before I explain how a person can disappear between 2 bus stops and still be driving 5 years later, I need you to promise me something. When you hear a bus late at night, when you see those headlights cutting through the darkness, check the route number. And if it's line 47, don't get on. Please, just don't get on. Now, let me tell you how my story begins. Part 1. The night shift line 47 wasn't a popular route. It ran through the industrial district of Portland, Oregon, connecting the late shift workers at the warehouses to downtown. Most nights, I'd have maybe 10 passengers total. The same faces, the same tired eyes, the same quiet nods of recognition. I'd been driving buses for Metro Transit for 12 years. Started when I was 25, right after my daughter Emma was born. The pay was decent, benefits were good, and I actually liked the solitude of the night shift. There was something peaceful about those empty streets, the hum of the engine, the gentle sway of the bus as it navigated familiar turns. October 14th, 2019, started like any other shift. I kissed my wife Sarah goodbye at 10 p.m., ruffled Emma's hair as she slept, and headed to the depot. The dispatcher, Old Joe we called him, handed me the keys to bus 2847. "Weather's getting weird out there, Marcus," he said, squinting at the darkening sky. "Radio says fog's rolling in thick. You be careful." I nodded, pocketing the keys. "Always am, Joe." The bus smelled like industrial cleaner and worn vinyl seats. I did my pre-trip inspection, checked the tires, tested the brakes, made sure all the lights worked. Everything normal, everything routine. My first pickup was at 11:15 p.m. Mrs. Patterson, a night janitor at the Reynolds building. She always sat in the 3rd row, always carried the same worn leather purse. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson," I called out as she climbed aboard. She gave me her usual tired smile. "Evening, Marcus. How's that little girl of yours?" "Growing like a weed," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Started 1st grade last month." We chatted briefly. The comfortable small talk of people who see each other every night but never outside of these fluorescent-lit moments. She got off at her usual stop, and I continued on. The fog Joe mentioned started rolling in around midnight. It came fast. One moment the streets were clear. The next I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I slowed down, turned on the fog lights. Safety first. That's what they drilled into us during training. By 12:30 a.m., I'd picked up my usual roster. Tommy, the warehouse worker. Angela from the 24-hour pharmacy. Mr. Petrov, who never said where he worked but always smelled faintly of motor oil. They sat in their usual seats, lost in their phones or staring out at the fog-shrouded streets. That's when I picked up someone new. The bus stop at Industrial and 42nd wasn't a popular one. Most nights I'd roll right past, but tonight a figure stood waiting. Just a silhouette in the fog at first. As I pulled up, the automatic doors hissing open, I got a better look. It was a kid. Couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, thin, wearing a heavy coat despite the mild October weather. What struck me most were his eyes. Pale blue, almost silver in the fluorescent light of the bus. He climbed aboard without a word. Exact change already in his hand. "Where you headed?" I asked. It wasn't required, but I liked to know where my passengers were going, especially the new ones. He looked at me for a long moment, those silver eyes unblinking. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost whispered. "The last stop." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. But I nodded, watched him walk to the very back of the bus. He sat in the last row, corner seat, and immediately turned to stare out the window at the fog. I should have trusted my instincts, Should have paid attention to that prickle of unease. But I had a route to run and fog to navigate. We continued on. Stop after stop, my regular passengers getting off at their usual places. Tommy at the distribution center, Angela at the pharmacy, Mr. Petrov at the unmarked building on 57th. Each time someone left, the bus felt a little emptier, a little colder. By 1:45 a.m., it was just me and the kid with silver eyes. The fog had gotten so thick I could barely see the road. I was creeping along at maybe 15 miles an hour, guided more by memory than sight. The heater was running full blast, but I kept shivering. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could see him back there, still staring out the window, perfectly still. We were approaching the stretch between Pine Street and Oak Avenue, a long, empty section with no stops for about 2 miles, just warehouses and abandoned lots. The streetlights were sparse here, swallowed by the fog. That's when the kid stood up. I watched in the mirror as he walked slowly up the aisle, his movements fluid, almost gliding. He stopped right behind my seat. I could feel him there, even though he didn't make a sound. "This isn't a stop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Next one's Oak Avenue, about 5 minutes." "I know," he said softly, "but this is where I need to get off." "I can't let you off between stops," I said. "Company policy, safety regulations." He leaned forward slightly. I could see his reflection in the windshield. Those silver eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. "You've been very kind, Marcus," he said. "Kinder than most. That's why I'm going to give you a choice." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How do you know my name?" "I know everyone who rides the night routes," he said. "Every driver, every passenger, every soul traveling through the darkness. And I know you're a good man. You have a daughter, Emma, 6 years old, loves butterflies and chocolate chip pancakes." My blood turned to ice. How do you... "The choice, Marcus," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "You can stop the bus right here, right now, let me off, and continue on your route. You'll finish your shift, go home to your family, and forget this ever happened. Or," my voice was barely a whisper, "or you can keep driving, follow company policy, and discover what happens to those who don't listen to warnings in the fog." Part 2. The Choice. Every instinct screamed at me to stop the bus. This kid, whatever he was, knew things he couldn't possibly know. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe he'd seen my name tag. Maybe Emma had been on the bus with me once. Though I couldn't remember ever bringing her. But those eyes, those silver eyes that seemed to see right through me. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, "but I can't stop between designated stops. It's for your safety." The kid sighed. It sounded like wind through empty buildings. "I tried," he said softly. "Remember that, Marcus. I tried to warn you." He walked back to his seat. In the mirror, I watched him sit down, return to staring out the window. My hands were shaking now, but I kept driving. Just a few more minutes to Oak Avenue. Then he could get off, and I could pretend this never happened. The fog seemed to thicken. The headlights barely penetrated 3 feet ahead. I slowed even more, crawling through the murk. The engine sounds seemed muffled, distant. Even my own breathing sounded strange, echoing in the empty bus. Then I realized it wasn't empty anymore. In the mirror, I could see shapes in the other seats, vague forms, like people made of shadow. They sat perfectly still, all facing forward, all except the kid, who still stared out his window. "What?" I started to say, but my voice died. The shadows were becoming clearer. I could make out features now, faces, familiar faces. Mrs. Patterson sat in her usual spot, 3rd row, but her skin was gray, her eyes clouded. She clutched that worn leather purse, but her fingers were stiff, lifeless. Tommy, the warehouse worker, Angela from the pharmacy, Mr. Petrov. All of them were there in their usual seats. But wrong. So terribly wrong. Their clothes were faded, torn. Their faces, God, their faces. "You should have stopped," the kid said. His voice carried clearly despite the distance. They all should have stopped. I slammed on the brakes. The bus skidded, fishtailed slightly, but stopped. My hands fumbled for the door controls. I had to get out, had to run. The doors wouldn't open. I pressed the button again. Nothing. The manual override jammed. I was trapped in here with whatever these things were. "You can't leave yet, Marcus," the kid said. He was standing again, walking up the aisle. The shadow passengers turned their heads to watch him pass. A synchronized movement that made my stomach lurch. "You're between stops, against company policy, remember?" "What are you?" I whispered. He tilted his head, those silver eyes reflecting the dim interior lights. "I'm a passenger, Marcus. Just like them. Just like you are now. I'm the driver. Were," he corrected. "You were the driver, but that was before you entered the between." "The between?" He gestured at the fog pressing against the windows. "The space between stops, between moments, between heartbeats. Most pass through without noticing, safe in their metal boxes, following their predetermined routes. But sometimes the fog is too thick, the night too dark, and people get lost in the between." I looked at the shadow passengers. Mrs. Patterson's clouded eyes met mine, and I saw recognition there. Horror, pleading. "These are..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Every passenger who didn't make it to their stop," the kid confirmed. "Every driver who couldn't find their way, trapped in the between, riding the route forever." "No," I shook my head. "No, this isn't real. This is a dream. I fell asleep at the wheel." "Check your watch, Marcus." I glanced down. My watch had stopped at 1:47 a.m. As I stared at it, the hands began moving backwards. Slowly at first, then faster. The numbers blurred. "Time doesn't work right in the between," the kid explained. "You could be here for minutes, or years. Hard to tell the difference after a while." I had to think, had to find a way out. Sarah would be waiting for me. Emma would wake up in a few hours, wondering where Daddy was. "You said I had a choice," I said. "Back there, you said I had a choice." The kid smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You made your choice, Marcus. You chose to follow the rules, to stick to the route. Very admirable, very permanent. There has to be a way out. There has to be." I grabbed the radio, tried to call dispatch. Static. Nothing but static. My cell phone. The screen was black, wouldn't turn on. "The living world can't hear you," the kid said. "You're between stops, remember? Between worlds." But I wasn't giving up. I'd driven this route 1,000 times. I knew every turn, every landmark. If I could just get to Oak Avenue, complete the route, I released the brake, pressed the accelerator. The bus lurched forward into the fog. "That won't work," the kid said. But I ignored him. I drove by instinct, by muscle memory. The fog was so thick I couldn't even see the hood of the bus. But I knew this road, left turn coming up, then a slight rise. The abandoned Stewart's Brewery would be on the right. But the road didn't turn, didn't rise. It just continued straight, endless, empty. "The between doesn't follow your maps," the kid said. He'd returned to his seat, was back to staring out the window. "It has its own geography, its own rules." I kept driving anyway. What else could I do? The shadow passengers sat in silence, watching nothing, going nowhere. The engine droned on. The fog pressed close. Minutes passed. or hours, or years. My watch spun wildly, meaningless. Then, a light ahead. Dim, barely visible through the murk, but definitely there. "What is that?" I asked. The kid actually looked surprised. "That's unusual." I pressed harder on the accelerator. The light grew brighter. It looked like a bus stop. The overhead light cutting through the fog, illuminating a small circle of sidewalk. And standing there, waiting, was a figure. Part 3. The passenger. As I pulled closer, the figure became clearer. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a Metro Transit uniform. She stood perfectly still, one hand raised as if hailing the bus. "Don't stop," the kid said suddenly. For the first time, he sounded worried. "Keep driving, Marcus, please." But I was already slowing down. This was a bus stop. She was a passenger, and maybe she knew a way out. "Marcus." The kid's voice was urgent now. "You don't understand, she's not—" I pulled up to the stop. The doors opened automatically, and I realized my mistake. The woman's uniform was mine. Metro Transit, line 47. The name tag read M. Chen, and her face, it was my face. Feminine features, longer hair, but unmistakably mine. She climbed aboard, exact change in hand. But instead of paying, she looked directly at me. Her eyes, my eyes, were filled with tears. "You weren't supposed to be here," she said. "Not for 5 more years. I don't understand." She walked past me, sat in the driver's seat I'd just vacated. No. I was still in the driver's seat, but she was there too, occupying the same space, like a double exposure. "Every route has its driver," she said, gripping the wheel. "Every between needs someone to ferry the lost. I've been driving this route, your route, since I got trapped, 5 years ago, October 15th, 2019. But that's today, No, Marcus. Check your watch." I looked down. The date display had been spinning wildly before, but now it showed clearly, October 15th, 2024. 5 years, I whispered. "I've been here 5 years?" "Time moves differently in the between," I explained. "You could experience a single night while years pass outside, or live decades in moments, but the route continues, always continues." I thought of Sarah, of Emma. My 6-year-old daughter would be 11 now. Would she even remember me? "There has to be a way out," I said. "You found me, that means—" "I didn't find you," she said sadly. "You found yourself. This is how it works, Marcus. The between needs a driver. When one gets lost, really lost, they become the route. And eventually they find their replacement." "Replacement?" She nodded toward the kid with silver eyes. He was standing again, moving toward the front of the bus. "Every driver gets a guide," she said. "Someone who was a passenger once, who chose to stay, to help, to try to warn the next one." The kid reached us, those silver eyes now sad. "I was 17 when I got on the wrong bus," he said. 50 years ago, or yesterday. Hard to keep track. I've been trying to save drivers ever since, giving them the choice. Most don't listen. "So I'm trapped," I said. "Forever." "Not forever," the other me said. "Just until you find your replacement. Could be 5 years, could be 50, but someone will come. Someone always does. And then you'll have a choice," the kid said. "Move on to whatever comes after, or stay. Become a guide. Try to save the next one." I looked at the shadow passengers, thought about all the people who'd stepped onto this bus and never made it home, all the families waiting, all the empty places at dinner tables. "There has to be another way," I said. The other me smiled sadly. That's what I said. That's what we all said. But the between has rules, and the route must continue, I finished. Somehow, I knew the words, had always known them. She began to fade, becoming translucent. My time's up, she said. I found my replacement. I can finally... Wait! I reached for her, for myself, but my hand passed through air. What about my family? How do I... They grieved, she whispered, barely visible now. They moved on. Sarah remarried, a good man. Treats Emma like his own. They're happy, Marcus. Let that be enough. And then she was gone. I was alone in the driver's seat. The kid returned to the back of the bus. The shadow passengers sat in their eternal silence. I gripped the wheel and started driving. Part 4. The route continues. I wish I could tell you how long I've been driving now. The watch stopped mattering ages ago, or yesterday. Time doesn't mean much in the between. The route never changes, but also never repeats. I drive through neighborhoods that shouldn't exist, past buildings that were torn down decades ago. Sometimes I glimpse the real world through the fog, see the actual Line 47 pass by, its living driver unaware of our shadow route running parallel. The passengers come and go. Some fade after a while, moving on to wherever souls go when they finally accept their fate. New ones occasionally appear. People who got lost, took the wrong turn, stayed too long in the spaces between moments. And I ferry them all. The lost, the forgotten, the in-between. The kid, my guide. He's still here, still trying to warn new drivers when they appear. Still failing, mostly, but he tries. That counts for something in the between. I've seen 3 other versions of myself now. 2 men, 1 woman, all driving Line 47, all trapped in different layers of the between. We nod when our routes intersect, acknowledge our shared fate. Sometimes we talk, compare notes about our families, our lives before, but mostly we just drive, because that's what we do. That's who we are. The drivers of the between, ferrying the lost through the fog. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm telling you this story, why I need you to listen, to understand, to warn others. The between is growing, every year, or what passes for years here. The fog spreads a little further, claims a few more stops, a few more routes. It's not just Line 47 anymore. I've seen buses from other cities in the fog. Trains, planes, even cars. Civilian vehicles whose drivers took one wrong turn too many. The between is hungry, and it's patient, and it's spreading. So remember what I told you at the start. When you're out late at night, when the fog rolls in thick and the world seems a little too quiet, pay attention. Stay on the marked routes, don't take shortcuts. And if someone warns you about a stop, about getting off, listen, because one day, maybe tonight, maybe years from now, you might see a bus emerge from a fog that wasn't there before. You might notice the route number, Line 47. You might even see the driver, gripping the wheel with pale hands, staring straight ahead with hollow eyes. That driver might be me, still ferrying the lost, still searching for my replacement, still hoping someone, anyone, will make the right choice. The fog is lifting now, or maybe thickening. Hard to tell anymore. But I can see a figure at the next stop, standing perfectly still, waiting. They're always waiting, and I always stop, because that's what drivers do. That's what we've always done. What we'll always do. The route must continue. I know some of you are thinking this is just a story, just another tale to help you drift off to sleep. And maybe that's all it is. Maybe I'm just a voice in the darkness, spinning yarns about things that go bump in the night. But maybe, just maybe, one of you will remember this when it matters. When you're standing at a bus stop late at night, when the fog is too thick and the world feels a little too thin, when someone offers you a choice that doesn't seem like a choice at all. Maybe you'll remember Marcus Chen, the bus driver who disappeared between stops, who's still out there, somewhere in the between, driving his eternal route. Maybe you'll make the right choice. Maybe you'll make it home. Or maybe I'll see you soon, standing at a stop that shouldn't exist. Exact change in hand, ready for a ride that never ends. The route must continue. It always does. Sweet dreams and safe travels.